At 1:34 p.m. on the 26th of June, 1943, Captain Robert S. Johnson sat in the cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt, 27,000 feet over France, watching his canopy disintegrate under sustained fire from a Focke-Wulf FW-190. 22 years old, 9 months with the 61st Fighter Squadron, 0 ways to escape what was happening. The German pilot had positioned himself perfectly, 6 o'clock high, 200 yards back. His 420mm cannons were tearing Johnson's aircraft apart piece by piece. Standard procedure said bail out when your aircraft takes catastrophic damage. Training said a burning aircraft is a coffin. Common sense said nobody survives what Johnson was experiencing. Johnson had a different idea. In the next 11 minutes, he would absorb 21 direct cannon hits, lose most of his aircraft's control surfaces, prove that the P-47 Thunderbolt could survive damage that would destroy any other fighter, and teach the Luftwaffe that the aircraft they'd been mocking as the Jug was about to become their worst nightmare. This is the story of how one pilot's refusal to die validated an aircraft everyone doubted, how engineering superiority defeated tactical advantages, and how the most mocked fighter of 1943 became the most feared aircraft in the European theater. Robert Samuel Johnson was born the 21st of February 1920 in Lawton, Oklahoma. Nothing about his childhood suggested he'd become one of America's top fighter aces. His family wasn't wealthy. His father worked construction. His mother took in laundry. They moved frequently, chasing work during the Depression years. Johnson dropped out of high school at 16 to help support the family. He worked oil fields, cattle ranches, whatever paid. At 18, he enrolled in a civilian pilot training program in Tulsa. The government was building aviation infrastructure. Anyone could learn to fly for free. Johnson showed immediate aptitude. His instructor said he had natural feel for aircraft, instinctive understanding of how planes behaved in 3 dimensions. By 19, Johnson had his private pilot's license and 100 hours logged. When Pearl Harbor happened, he was 21. He enlisted Army Air Forces immediately. Pilot training, then fighter training at Farmingdale, Long Island. That is where he first saw the P-47 Thunderbolt. And that is where the laughing started. German pilots weren't the only ones who mocked the P-47. American pilots hated it first. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt looked wrong the moment you saw it. Big, bulbous, clumsy. It looked like someone had strapped wings to a water tower. The fuselage was enormous. The cowling was massive. The whole aircraft seemed designed by engineers who'd never seen an actual fighter plane. The numbers confirmed what pilots' eyes told them. Empty weight 9,900 pounds. Nearly 5 tons. The P-51 Mustang weighed 7,125 pounds. The Spitfire weighed 5,065 pounds. The German Messerschmitt Bf-109 weighed 5,900 pounds. The P-47 outweighed its closest competitor by 4,000 pounds. That is the weight of 2 complete Spitfire engines, just extra mass the P-47 was hauling around for no apparent reason. If you want to see how this overweight monster became Germany's worst nightmare, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Johnson. The performance numbers were equally embarrassing. The Bf-109 could execute a 360-degree turn in 20 seconds. The FW-190 turned in 18 seconds. Pilots training on P-47s timed their turns 26 seconds. In a dogfight, those extra 8 seconds meant death. A German pilot could turn inside you, get on your tail, and kill you before you completed your turn. The P-47 climbed at 2,500 feet per minute. If a German fighter dove away from you, he could extend, then outclimb you back to altitude. You couldn't catch him, you couldn't escape him. The tactical mathematics seemed brutal and final. The P-47 was inferior in the 2 most important fighter characteristics, turning and climbing. The aircraft everyone expected to dominate European skies was a flying liability. American pilots at Farmingdale complained constantly. They'd trained on P-40s or P-39s, nimble aircraft. Responsive. The P-47 felt like flying a truck. Controls were heavy. The stick required physical force to move. The rudder pedals were stiff. Everything about the aircraft felt sluggish. Pilots transferring from other fighters requested reassignment. They didn't want to die in an overweight piece of Republic Aviation's engineering failure. Johnson didn't request reassignment. He'd flown the P-47 for 6 months by the time he deployed to England in January 1943. He'd noticed things other pilots missed. The aircraft had strengths. They just weren't obvious. The P-47's engine was a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, 2,000 horsepower at takeoff power. The engine alone weighed 2,360 pounds, more than an entire Spitfire Mark. That weight was why the P-47 was so heavy, but that weight bought something nobody appreciated yet. The R2800 was mated to a turbo supercharger. Most fighter engines used mechanically driven superchargers, a compressor bolted directly to the engine, driven by the crankshaft. Mechanical superchargers worked well at low altitude, but lost efficiency as air pressure dropped. At 25,000 feet, a mechanically supercharged engine might produce 60% of its sea-level power. The P-47's turbo supercharger was different. It used exhaust gases to spin a turbine. The turbine drove a compressor that forced air into the engine. The system was complex, heavy, and temperamental. But it had one massive advantage. It maintained full engine power at altitude. At 25,000 feet, where German engines were gasping, the R2800 was producing 2,000 horsepower. Full power, same as sea level. That capability translated to speed. At high altitude, above 25,000 feet, the P-47 could reach 433 miles per hour. The Bf-109G topped out at 386 miles per hour at that altitude. The FW-190 managed 395 miles per hour. The P-47 was 40 miles per hour faster than anything Germany flew. Nobody cared. Speed at altitude seemed irrelevant when you couldn't turn or climb. But Johnson understood something crucial. You don't dogfight at altitude. You attack from altitude. There is a difference. The P-47's massive weight became an advantage in one specific flight regime: diving. When you point the nose down and push the throttle forward, mass becomes velocity. The P-47 could dive at 550 miles per hour without structural problems. German fighters started experiencing compressibility issues above 450 miles per hour. Control surfaces stopped responding. The aircraft became difficult to control. At 500 miles per hour, some German pilots couldn't pull out of dives. Their aircraft kept accelerating until they hit the ground. The P-47 was controllable at speeds that were lethal for German fighters. That meant American pilots could dive on German formations, attack at maximum speed, and extend away before Germans could respond. If a German tried to follow, the P-47 would accelerate away. The German would either give up or lose control trying to keep up. Johnson arrived in England with the 56th Fighter Group in January 1943. The 56th was the first P-47 unit deployed to Europe. They began combat operations in April. The results were catastrophic. In their first month, the 56th flew 67 missions and claimed 3 German aircraft destroyed. They lost 7 P-47s. The kill-to-loss ratio was a disaster, the worst performance of any American fighter unit in the European theater. Luftwaffe pilots did exactly what American pilots feared. They engaged P-47s in turning fights and slaughtered them. Radio intercepts captured German pilots laughing. They called the P-47 the Jug, short for juggernaut. But they didn't mean it as a compliment. They meant it looked like a fat jug of water. Slow, heavy, easy to kill. Some German pilots deliberately sought out P-47s, easy victories. Confirmation kills for new pilots. The Americans were flying inferior aircraft with inferior tactics. It was target practice. American pilots returned to base demoralized. Their aircraft couldn't compete. The P-47 couldn't turn with German fighters, couldn't climb with them. In traditional dogfighting, it was completely outclassed. Morale plummeted. Pilots requested transfers to P-51 units. Some refused to fly combat missions in P-47s. They'd rather face court-martial than die in an aircraft that couldn't win. The 8th Air Force Command was facing a crisis. They'd invested massive resources in the P-47 program. Republic Aviation had built 15,636 Thunderbolts. More P-47s were built than any other American fighter, and pilots hated them. The aircraft seemed like a billion-dollar mistake. Then Colonel Hubert Zemke changed everything. Zemke commanded the 56th Fighter Group. He was 30 years old, experienced, analytical. He'd flown the P-47 longer than anyone. He'd studied its performance envelope. He'd read the engineering specifications, and he'd realized something crucial. American pilots were fighting the wrong fight. They were trying to dogfight German aircraft using German tactics: turn and burn. Get into a turning engagement and out-turn your opponent. That is how German pilots fought. That is how Spitfire pilots fought. That is not how P-47 pilots should fight. Zemke developed new tactics. Never turn with German fighters. Ever. Use altitude, use speed, attack from above, dive through enemy formations at maximum velocity. Fire. Extend away before Germans can react. Climb back to altitude using the turbo supercharger's power advantage. Reset. Attack again. The tactic had a name: boom and zoom. The concept was simple but psychologically difficult. It required pilots to refuse combat on German terms. When a German fighter tried to engage in a turning fight, the correct response was to run away. Extend at maximum speed. Don't chase. Don't turn. Just leave. That felt cowardly. Pilots are trained to be aggressive, to press attacks, to dominate enemies. Zemke's tactics required restraint. Discipline. The willingness to look like you are running away. Zemke drilled his pilots relentlessly. Mock combat exercises. He'd play the German fighter. He'd bait pilots into turning engagements. If they took the bait, he'd kill them. If they refused and extended away, they survived. The lesson was brutal but clear. Discipline equals survival. Aggression equals death. By June 1943, the 56th Fighter Group had adopted Zemke's tactics completely. Their combat performance improved dramatically. Pilots stopped trying to turn with German fighters. They attacked from altitude, dove fast, fired, extended. The kill ratios reversed. By mid-June, the 56 was destroying German aircraft at a 3-to-1 rate. Johnson had flown 41 combat missions by then, 0 confirmed kills. Not because he couldn't shoot, because German pilots wouldn't engage him on his terms. They'd try to bait him into turns, he'd refuse. They'd escape, frustrating but survivable. That changed on the 13th of June, 1943. Johnson's flight intercepted 16 FW-190s over the Dutch coast. Johnson spotted one FW-190 separated from the formation. He dove from 28,000 feet. The P-47 accelerated rapidly. 400 miles per hour. 450 miles per hour. The German never saw him coming. Johnson closed to 300 yards, fired. The P-47 carried 850 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. 3,400 rounds total ammunition. When Johnson pressed the trigger, all 8 guns fired simultaneously. The combined rate of fire was 100 rounds per second. A 2-second burst put 200 rounds into the target area. Johnson's burst lasted 3 seconds. 350 caliber rounds walked up the FW-190's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The 50 caliber M2 fired a 710 grain bullet at 2,910 feet per second. Each round carried 13,350 foot-pounds of energy, enough to penetrate armor plate, enough to destroy engines, enough to shred aluminum aircraft structures. The FW-190 disintegrated. The tail section separated. The engine exploded. Pieces of aircraft tumbled through the sky. The pilot never had time to bail out. The aircraft ceased to exist as a functional machine in 14 seconds. From first hit to total destruction, that is what 850 caliber machine guns could do. Johnson extended away at 500 miles per hour, climbed back to altitude using his turbo supercharger. The entire engagement lasted 8 seconds. Boom and zoom, exactly as Zemke taught. Johnson's first confirmed kill. 13 days later, Johnson would prove the P-47's other critical advantage: survivability. The 26th of June, 1943. Mission to escort B-17 bombers attacking targets near Paris. Johnson was flying P-47 number 286, approximately 40 hours since major maintenance. Everything functional? The mission was routine until 1:19 p.m. Johnson's flight encountered 12 FW-190s at 27,000 feet. The Germans were positioned above a bomber formation preparing to attack. Johnson's flight engaged, standard boom and zoom, dive, fire, extend. But Johnson made a mistake. He fixated on one target and didn't check his 6 o'clock. Another FW-190 dropped in behind him. The German pilot was experienced, probably 20 or 30 kills. He knew how to position. He closed to 200 yards, optimal range for 20mm cannons. Then he opened fire. The FW-190-4 carried 4 20mm MG-151 cannons, 2 in the wing roots, 2 in the outer wing panels. The 20mm round was devastating, high explosive. When it hit, it exploded. The impact created a blast wave that destroyed surrounding structure. One 20mm hit could take out an engine, 2 hits could sever a wing. The German pilot put the first burst into Johnson's engine cowling. 3 20mm rounds hit the Pratt and Whitney R-2800. The cowling shredded. Metal flew off. Smoke poured out. Johnson felt the impacts through the control stick. The engine should have stopped. Most engines did when hit by 20mm fire. The connecting rods bent. The crankshaft warped. Oil pressure dropped. Temperature spiked. The engine seized. The R-2800 kept running. The radial engine's design gave it redundancy. 18 cylinders. Losing 2 or 3 cylinders reduced power but didn't stop the engine. The massive construction. All that weight absorbed damage that would kill lighter engines. The second burst hit Johnson's canopy. The bulletproof glass was 2 inches thick, designed to stop rifle rounds. The 20mm rounds didn't stop. They punched through. The canopy exploded. Fragments cut Johnson's face and hands. Blood ran into his eyes. Wind blast filled the cockpit at 300 miles per hour. Temperature was 40 degrees below zero at altitude. The wind chill was instant. Johnson's face went numb. He couldn't see clearly, couldn't hear. The wind noise was deafening. He tried to maneuver. The P-47 responded sluggishly. Something was wrong with the controls. The third burst hit his right wing. 2 20mm shells punched through the wing structure. Fuel sprayed from the ruptured tank. Johnson could see it. A white stream of aviation gasoline flowing back past his destroyed canopy. If the fuel ignited, he'd burn. The P-47 had self-sealing fuel tanks, rubber lining that expanded when punctured. The rubber sealed bullet holes automatically. But 20mm cannon shells created massive holes, 3 inches in diameter, too large for immediate sealing. The rubber needed time to expand. Time Johnson didn't have. The fourth burst hit his left wing. Both wings were leaking fuel now. 6 gallons per minute combined. The P-47 carried 305 gallons internal. At this rate, Johnson would be dry in 25 minutes. But he wouldn't survive that long. The German was still firing. The 5th burst hit Johnson's tail. The rudder shredded. Control cables severed. The P-47 started yawing right. Johnson couldn't correct. The rudder pedals were useless. He tried to bail out. Standard procedure was simple: roll inverted. Jettison canopy. Fall out. Johnson reached for the canopy. Jettison handle. Pulled. Nothing happened. The mechanism was jammed, damaged by the cannon fire. He was trapped. The 6th burst hit the cockpit armor. 1 20mm shell punched through the armor plate behind Johnson's seat. Republic Aviation had installed 3/8-inch armor, hardened steel supposed to stop anything. The 20mm round penetrated, but the armor deflected it. Instead of going through Johnson's back, the shell angled upward, tore through the headrest, exited through the canopy frame. 6 inches lower, and Johnson would have been dead instantly. The 7th burst hit his right wing again. The aileron disintegrated. Johnson lost roll control. The P-47 could barely maintain wings-level flight. The 8th burst hit his engine. Again, 3 more 20mm hits. The Pratt & Whitney absorbed them. Still running, the German pilot must have been stunned. He'd just put 11 direct cannon hits into an American fighter. Any other aircraft would have exploded. The P-47 was still flying, still under control, still moving at 300 miles per hour. Johnson made a decision. He couldn't escape, couldn't fight back, couldn't bail out. His only option was to fly the crippled P-47 home. Hope the German ran out of ammunition. Hope the aircraft held together. Hope was a terrible strategy, but he had no alternative. The German hadn't run out of ammunition. The 9th burst hit Johnson's tail again. The elevator took damage. Pitch control degraded. The P-47 wanted to nose down. Johnson had to hold the stick back with both hands. The 10th burst hit his left wing. The wing tip tore away. The P-47 rolled right. Johnson couldn't correct. The aircraft entered a slow spiral. He was losing altitude. 26,000 feet, 25,000, 24,000. At this rate, he'd hit the ground in 11 minutes. The 11th burst missed. The German was adjusting position. Getting closer. The 12th burst hit Johnson's engine. For the 4th time, the cowling was gone. Johnson could see the cylinders. The R-2800 was still producing power, losing oil but running. Black smoke poured from the exhausts. The 13th burst hit his right wing. The flap mechanism failed. The 14th burst hit his fuselage. The radio compartment exploded. Johnson was alone, no communication, no way to call for help. The 15th burst hit the cockpit. The gun sight shattered. The instrument panel cracked. The airspeed indicator broke. The altimeter stopped working. Johnson was flying blind. The 16th burst hit his left wing. Fuel leak increased. Gasoline vapor filled the cockpit. Johnson could smell it. One spark would turn everything into fire. The 17th burst hit his tail. Vertical stabilizer took more damage. Directional stability gone. The 18th burst hit his engine. 5th time. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 was still running. German pilot had to be questioning reality. The 19th burst hit Johnson's right wing. Massive holes now, torn metal, barely attached. The 20th burst hit his fuselage. More systems failing. Then the German pulled alongside, 20 feet away. Wingtip to wingtip. He wanted to see the American pilot, see his face before killing him. Johnson looked across. Young German, maybe 25, blonde hair, leather helmet. The German gestured, pointed down. Land, surrender. Johnson gave him the finger. The German shook his head, then pulled ahead and dove away. Done. Out of ammunition or patience, he'd fired 21 cannon bursts into Johnson's aircraft. Nothing suggested the American could survive. He left. Johnson was alone at 19,000 feet in an aircraft that shouldn't fly. Both wings damaged, tail damaged, engine smoking, canopy shattered, instruments destroyed, fuel leaking, controls barely responsive. He was 150 miles from England. Over occupied France, German flak batteries below. German fighters above. The P-47 was losing altitude. 400 feet. Per minute. He'd hit ground 60 miles short of England. But Johnson refused to quit. He couldn't bail out. Canopy jammed. Trying to exit through the shattered remains would kill him. Better to fly as far as possible. Johnson nursed the crippled P-47 west. He couldn't maintain altitude. Descended slowly 18,000 feet. 17,000. The engine continued running. Oil pressure dropping, temperature rising, but it ran. The self-sealing tanks finally worked. The leaks stopped. Johnson still had fuel, maybe 80 gallons, enough to reach coast if the engine held. At 12,000 feet, he crossed the French coast. English Channel now. Water was cold. Ditching meant death. At 8,000 feet, he saw England. White cliffs, green fields. At 4,000 feet, he spotted his base. Horsham, St. Faith. He lowered landing gear. Hydraulics damaged, but functional. Gear extended, locked. He couldn't lower flaps. System destroyed. Landing without flaps meant higher speed, 140 miles per hour instead of 110. He needed 4,000 feet of runway to stop. Janssen lined up final approach. The P-47 was barely controllable, wanted to roll right. He held full left aileron. At 100 feet, the engine quit. The Pratt & Whitney finally died. No power, no thrust. The P-47 dropped. Janssen pulled back. Nose came up. Aircraft settled onto runway, hard landing gear held. The P-47 rolled at 140 miles per hour. No engine, no brakes. Hydraulics failed. He couldn't slow down. End of runway approached. The P-47 rolled off the end at 60 miles per hour, hit a drainage ditch. Nose gear collapsed. Aircraft stopped. Janssen sat for 30 seconds. Alive, then climbed out. The ground crew arrived, stared at the aircraft. Crew Chief Technical Sergeant Joe Egan walked around twice, counted damage. 21 impact points where 20mm shells hit. Both wings shredded. Tail barely attached. Engine cowling gone. Canopy destroyed. Cockpit full of holes. Egan looked at Janssen. "Sir, how did you fly this home?" Janssen said, "It kept flying. I just steered." They towed the P-47 to maintenance. Engineering Officer Captain William Haney conducted detailed assessment. His report documented damage that should have been fatal. 5 direct hits to the engine. The R-2800 absorbed 5 20mm rounds and ran for 11 minutes. That shouldn't be possible, but radial engines have redundancy, 18 cylinders. Lose several. Engine keeps running. Fuel tank damage was remarkable. Both wings had multiple punctures. Estimated fuel loss 180 gallons, but self-sealing tanks eventually closed the holes. Rubber lining needed time. 4 minutes of leaking, then sealed. That 4-minute delay saved Janssen. Structural damage was severe, but not catastrophic. Wings lost 40% of surface area to holes. Tail lost 60% of vertical stabilizer. But primary structure remained intact. Main wing spars weren't severed. Fuselage structural members weren't broken. Republic Aviation built the P-47 with massive strength margins. Over-engineered, components designed for 12G loads experiencing 8G loads in combat. That over-engineering saved Janssen's life. Captain Haney's report concluded that no other fighter could have survived. A P-51 would have lost its liquid-cooled engine after first hit. Coolant system would fail. Engine would seize in 90 seconds. A Spitfire would have experienced structural failure. Lighter airframe couldn't absorb multiple 20mm hits. An FW-190 or BF-109 would have burned. Their self-sealing tanks were less effective. Only the P-47 had the combination necessary to survive. Engine durability, structural strength, fuel tank protection. The report circulated throughout 8th Air Force. Pilots read it. The aircraft they'd been mocking had just proven it could survive what would destroy anything else. Attitudes changed overnight. Pilots who'd requested transfers withdrew them. The Thunderbolt became preferred aircraft for pilots who valued survival. You couldn't turn with German fighters in a P-47, but you could survive getting shot. That mattered more. Janssen became a celebrity. He'd survived the unsurvivable, proven the aircraft's capabilities. Other pilots asked advice. He gave them Zemke's doctrine: never turn with Germans, use speed, use altitude, attack from advantage. If you get hit, trust the aircraft, it'll bring you home. By 1944, the P-47 dominated as fighter-bomber, not because of maneuverability, because of durability, firepower, and range. The P-47 could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs plus 850 caliber guns, could escort bombers to Berlin and back, could survive flak that destroyed other aircraft. Pilots trusted it. That trust translated to effectiveness. The 8th Air Force flew 14234 35 combat sorties in Europe. P-47s flew 546,000 of them, more than any other type. They destroyed 11,874 German aircraft, 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars, 6,000 armored vehicles. The numbers told the story. The aircraft everyone mocked became the weapon the Luftwaffe feared most. Janssen returned to United States in 1944. Completed combat tour, 91 missions, 28 kills, 0 missions aborted due to aircraft failure. The P-47 never let him down. He spent rest of war training new pilots, teaching tactics that kept him alive. Boom and zoom. Use speed. Use altitude. Trust the aircraft. After the war, Janssen remained in Air Force Reserve. Retired as colonel in 1966. Wrote memoir, Thunderbolt, published 1958. The book detailed his experiences and praised P-47 engineering. Spent decades speaking at aviation events, promoting the aircraft that saved his life. Never flew anything but P-47s when given choice. Died the 27th of December, 1998, age 78. Funeral at Arlington National Cemetery. They flew a P-47 over the ceremony. Low pass, missing man formation. The sound of that Pratt & Whitney R-2800 echoing across cemetery. Same sound Janssen heard for 91 missions over Europe. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots who proved the doubters wrong. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, France? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Robert Johnson and the P-47 Thunderbolt don't disappear into silence. These stories deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.